Hi friends, I'm Scott Giles and welcome to Power Talk, my podcast here on Facebook Live and YouTube. I cover topics related to hypno-coaching, spirituality, and the hypnotic arts and sciences generally. If you'd like to know more about my professional work, check out my website, which I'll tag at the end of this video. Today I want to talk about bereavement. The feeling of intense sadness that comes in the wake of a death. That's an important distinction. Bereavement is only when you've lost someone to death. Grief is when you have other kinds of losses. The two emotions are different. Our reaction to them may be similar, but there is something special about how we deal with bereavement that I particularly want to explore in this video. My idea to explore this topic was suggested by the season. It's early November as I make this video, and we have just completed both Halloween and the Day of the Dead celebrations. Halloween, which in ancient times was called Samhain, was the start of the Celtic New Year. The harvest had been gathered, and for the cultures in what we now know as Ireland and Scotland, it made sense for the harvest to be the turning of the year. My ancient ancestors, I'm mostly Scots-Irish, believed that on Samhain the veil between the worlds was thin, and the dead might return to haunt the living, and they didn't want that. So they lit bonfires on the hilltops to lure the spirits there away from the homes, and people put offerings outside their door so that any spirits wandering the streets would be bribed to accept the treats offered and not haunt the houses. This is the origin of our modern trick-or-treat custom. Now, the Day of the Dead is a Hispanic custom that comes right at the start of November. It's a day to remember loved ones who have died, so altars of remembrance would be built in homes to the beloved departed. Families would go to the cemetery to clean up grave sites and to remember. So both holidays, Halloween and the Day of the Dead, are about dealing with bereavement. Now, let me start by saying that I think bereavement is a healthy and good emotion. We should mourn the creatures and people we have loved who have died. They are not replaceable. We may love others going forward, but we add to our list of loves. We don't replace the love we held toward the departed. We just continue to love them in a different way, and we learn to hold their memories in a different way. We feel bereavement at the loss of people and our animal companions as well. Now, there are some mental health professionals that automatically characterize bereavement as a form of depression and treat it that way. But as a member of the clergy, I disagree. Bereavement is a normal, not an abnormal, human emotion. We would identify it as a problem only if the worst of the feelings persist a very long time, like more than a year, and intense sorrow and preoccupation continues beyond that time. Short of that, feeling bereavement is the price we pay for love, to paraphrase Queen Elizabeth II. Now, much of the initial understanding we've had about bereavement comes from the work of Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross in her 1969 book titled On Death and Dying. She studied patients who were dying and explored how they came to terms with their realization that their time on earth was coming to a close. She described 5 stages that the mind will pass through as it deals with that realization. Now, I'm especially fond of Dr. Kubler-Ross's work, as she did this research at the University of Chicago Medical Center. I did my own doctoral studies at Mead-Valamer Theological School, which at the time was a full on-campus affiliate of the University of Chicago. And I did my own clinical training at the University of Chicago Medical Center, which is where Kubler-Ross did her study. So I have walked down those exact same halls. Since her book was published, many have found that Kubler-Ross's 5 stages can be applied to understand any form of loss, including the loss of a job or any significant possession, and so on. Her 5 stages are: first, denial. You can't believe what's happened. Second, anger. You get mad that the loss has come your way because it seems so unfair. Third, bargaining. You try to make some sense out of it. Fourth, depression. You experience a time of subdued mood when you realize that things are not going to resolve as you might wish. And finally, acceptance. You come to a place of peace about the loss itself. Now, people do not necessarily go through the stages in order, and not everyone experiences all of them. Some stop at a particular stage. When I was in training, I had one guy who was furious. He was a patient at the hospital, was furious that nothing further could be done for him, and he wasn't moving on from that anger. And my own supervisor said, Scott, if he wants to go angry, you have to accept that he will go angry. You can't make him go through other stages of bereavement. Now, there have been attempts to update the Kubler-Ross model, and some of them are very good. For example, I've recently seen one from an anonymous source that gives the stages as: first, denial and shock; second, pain and grief; third, anger and bargaining; fourth, sadness, reflection, and loneliness; and finally, 5, an upward turning mood. Now, I don't know how to evaluate that model, but most of these different models of bereavement or even loss are much more alike than they are different. To them, I add an additional stage that comes from my many years as a clergy person, a chaplain, and a medical hypnotist. I call this, in my own mind, the resurrection stage. After we have loved someone and then lost them, after we have enjoyed an experience, a job, and lost it, there is a period where we go through those stages. But then, after some time has passed, if we do it right, the very best qualities of the person we lost began to show up in our lives with a renewed power. This is a special kind of resurrection where the best parts of the people we've loved and lost begin to show up in our lives. I never much liked poetry, but I had a girlfriend who died, and she loved poetry. And after about 2 years after her death, I found that I began to like poetry myself. This best part of her, the poetic self, resurrected itself into my life as a form of kind of this worldly resurrection. I've seen this happen many times. This is a final gift that our beloved dead give us as they pass. The downside of their personalities goes with them, but the best parts can live on in the people they've loved and the people who have loved them. Finally, I want to close by mentioning a regretful thing that I've seen some people do. I call this anticipatory bereavement. This is when you think a loss is coming your way. This would typically be you anticipate the death of a loved one, and so you begin your journey through the stages of bereavement too early because your loved one has not died. And the danger here is that if your bereavement is premature, you may end up in a situation, and I've seen it repeatedly, where the sick person gets better. The cancer goes into remission, the drug works especially well, or just you get what amounts to a miracle. But they got better. But everyone around them had in fact completed their bereavement process and were ready to move on with their lives, which no longer had much of a place for the person who was sick. I think this is the reason why so many marriages break up among cancer patients. The caretaking spouse assumed death would be coming, and when it doesn't, they can't quite get the relationship to go back on the rails. So don't make that mistake. Bereavement comes to us all. It is the price we pay for love. But don't go there any sooner than you must. Until a death has actually happened, hold off acting as if it had. That's my advice. Hey, thank you for your time and attention today. I'll be back next week with another talk on a different subject. I'd like to invite you to join me. It does help me if you let others know about my videos, so please like, share, and subscribe. If I can be of help to you, feel free to reach out through my website, email, or my Patreon channel. Stay well and stay safe.